I just tell the truth, and telling the truth is crazy in a world full of lies. If you mix brilliance with bravery, that we can ignite something. Even this conversation alone can ignite the people.
The time is now to express and for people to believe in themselves. The time is now for it to be okay to be great. People in this world shun people for being great, for being a bright color, for standing out. But the time is now to be okay to be the greatest you.
What's up, guys? It's your girl Kelly. Thank you so much for clicking on this video, guys, and if you are new to the channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it if you are into things like true crime stories, news, and politics. It's what we regularly get into, and then every now and then, you know, we'll do a little one-off video, a little bit of history, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think you'll enjoy, guys. We're trying to see what works over here, so give me some feedback in the comments, and especially if you are a returning listener or subscriber, as always, thank you so much for being a friend, guys, and I appreciate all of your feedback that you give me, so please interact with the video. It really does help me out, and I greatly appreciate it. So today, it's a kind of a horrifying situation to even imagine. I mean, who can imagine, or who would even think that they would die by plane crash, especially by your airline, your commercial airline pilot deliberately crashing your plane, you know, in a nefarious way because they wanted to end their life. So it's disturbing on many different levels, and luckily this does not happen very often, but it happens, and it has happened enough times to be documented, about a handful of times. So we're going to go over some of these examples and then talk about it. I want to get your thoughts, guys. Let me know what y'all think in the comments, and without further ado, let's get right on into it. It's a terrifying scenario. A pilot is flying an airliner carrying hundreds of unsuspecting passengers. He decides to intentionally crash the plane, killing everyone on board. Pilot suicides are thankfully very rare and are getting rarer, but they do happen occasionally, sometimes with horrific results. The Aviation Safety Network identifies at least 8 instances worldwide since 1976 where pilots appear to have deliberately crashed airliners, sometimes taking dozens or hundreds of people with them. So in this video, guys, we're going to go over 6 of these, which I don't know about the other 2, but these were the ones that took the lives of, like, you know, many people. So there were some that, you know, most of the time suicide by pilot happens where they crash the plane, but they are the only ones inside of the plane. There's many examples of this. So some of the psychology behind this, okay? So one study points out that one possible reason why a commercial suicidal pilot might choose to crash their plane is that the evidence it was self-harm might be so destroyed, so protecting their family and the memory of the pilot from shame of suicide. Using the aircraft as the instrument of death might also be an expression of resentment against the stress of the job, or grudges against the airline employer, or anger at society at large. But as airlines rush to reassure the public by introducing new, more intensive regulations and checks on the mental health of pilots, it is possible that this hasty response could end up encouraging the very problem it seeks to tackle. A study entitled "The Psychological Effects of Constant Evaluation on Airline Pilots," an exploratory study by Ina Lempurer and Mary Ann Laurie from the University of Malta, concludes that constant evaluation in itself has psychological effects. This study, published in the International Journal of Aviation Psychology in 2009, points out that airline pilots are the most frequently trained, evaluated, and monitored professionals in the world. Yet many pilots fear flight and medical checks because they represent a threat to their flying license. For most pilots, job security and the recurrent investigations are more stressful than potential personal injury or even death. Because proficiency and medical checks are heavily standardized through years of practice, pilots get to know in detail the skills, attitudes, and medical criteria that secure their flying license. Active pilots become practiced on how to hide stress-related psychological problems during their medical evaluation so as not to jeopardize their flying license. The message that comes from this study, from this research, is that psychological distress among active airline pilots is a reality. I think that goes for anybody. Pilots in this study wanted airlines to normalize this reality by making professional psychological help more available and removing the stigma on pilots who may need such assistance by accepting the fact that certain psychological problems, albeit temporary, may be a common hazard to this profession. Until airlines solve the conundrum of how to induce pilots to go for psychological help without endangering their license, the enigma of what causes some crashes will endure. So that's an interesting tidbit there, but I don't think it really, I don't know. And it's, we say this all the time. A psychotic person who has an agenda and who has an idea set in their mind, no matter what you try to do, no matter what kind of safeguards or anything you put into place, they're going to carry that out. I mean, this is why the argument against, like, taking away guns is completely, just a nonsensical argument, because if somebody wants to harm somebody else, they can pick up any instrument and make that into an instrument of death. I mean, it's just the fact of the matter. The only reason why I feel like people are, you know, more scrutinizing of this situation, airline pilots in general, is because obviously they have the lives of, you know, sometimes hundreds of people, you know, in their hands. So obviously it's a horrific thing if they choose to act on that and harm all of those people. So, I mean, you guys, I'm sure, remember probably the most famous instance of this is Malaysia flight, and it was disputed for a long time about what exactly happened on this Malaysian flight 370, but I believe, after watching numerous documentaries, hearing people speak about it, and just seeing the evidence for myself, that this was an obvious pilot committing suicide by aircraft, and thus taking all of those different passengers along with him, which is absolutely horrifying. Now we're going to get into some of the details of that exact crash. Okay, so MH370 was carrying 239 people total when it took off from Kuala Lumpur on March 8th, 2014, and it has since never been found, guys. It's still completely missing for the most part. There have been pieces of debris that were found, but for the most part, this has maintained to be a mystery.
Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 slipped off radar screens in the early hours of March the 8th between eastern Malaysia and southern Vietnam. 239 people were on board the Boeing 777 travelling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The Type 200ER aircraft took off at 41 minutes past midnight local time and climbed to a cruising altitude of some 10,700 metres. Malaysia Airlines says it lost radar contact with the flight at 1:30 a.m. local time. Tracking data suggests the plane flew a course of 25 degrees towards the Igari navigation reference point before diverting from its intended route, veering west. British analysis of satellite data placed MH370's last position in remote waters off Australia's west coast, far from any landing sites. On March the 24th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines concluded the plane went down in the southern Indian Ocean.
This is just a horrifying thing. It's a horrifying tragedy, and there was a lot of speculation about this exact flight and what happened, the path that it took. A lot of people thought that it was caught in the China Sea, you know, on its way to Beijing, but I feel that, you know, that's not the case. I agree with the analysis that is the consensus today, that they took the turn based on the evidence that they have, satellite, different, you know, military bases that actually spotted this plane, but took no action or did not actually do their due diligence to report what was going on, thinking that, you know, it was not a threat. Basically, it was just obviously a 757. It was not a fighter jet or anything like that. So, and then this man basically just flew this plane, and I say this man because we do know who was responsible. It was the actual pilot. It was not the co-pilot, who was a young guy who had his whole life ahead of him. It was this other guy who was apparently going through a divorce, this pilot, and had other issues that were going on in his life. And it's really unknown why exactly he did it, but I mean, there's There's endless theories you could come up with, and who knows? I mean, people are crazy. But look at this flight simulation. This is terrifying. I mean, when I say my worst nightmare, I am dead ass serious. Especially crashing into the ocean like this. And I'm going to show you guys a video of the Indian Ocean where this plane would have allegedly crashed. And my God, it's the stuff of nightmares. If you fear the ocean, just hold on to yourself when we look at this next footage, because, oh, God. And it's believed now that he was probably the only one who was awake for this, and maybe he might not have even been awake for the crash. Who knows? But I'll read you guys an article on why they think that he might have been the only one still alive. Jesus. Look. Oh! My God. Okay. And why people think that he might have still been alive and everyone else might have already perished by the time this plane actually crashed into the Indian Ocean. So let's read that article first. And it was alleged that he possibly depressurized the cabin of MH370. With all the mystery swirling around Malaysia Airline Flight 370, many people wonder why the passengers and crew didn't use their cell phones to call or text message of distress. There's speculation that the cabin may have lost air pressure for some unknown reason, incapacitating all on board. Under ordinary circumstances, most aircraft cabins are pressurized to 8,000 feet above sea level, an altitude that lowers the amount of oxygen in the blood by about 4 percentage points, according to New England Journal of Medicine report. This may lead to some discomfort, but no ill health effects for a person in good health. But if there was an air leak, the plane flew too high, or someone intentionally fiddled with the craft in some way, it would have had detrimental effects, says Randy Padfield, a licensed pilot with more than 10,000 hours of flying experience and the CEO of Aviation International News. What happens first is your brain is not as quick. You get very confused and stop thinking clearly. Then you'd fall asleep and eventually die due to lack of oxygen.
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
So those are the very last words heard from the pilot and the plane Malaysian Flight 370. Now, I just read you guys about the depressurization. I don't know how long it would actually take, you know, if he did this in a slow, methodical way and just kept climbing. Now, it's possible that his co-pilot might have taken a nap, and this is maybe whenever he took the actions that he took. So a lot of cases you will find that that's why they have two pilots. A lot of these pilots are overworked. They work long hours, so it's normal for one of them to take small naps, go on bathroom breaks, and, you know, all of these different things that, you know, people need to do. So it's possible that this is one scenario. You know, his co-pilot decided to take a little cat nap, and he took that opportunity to basically slowly raise the plane higher and higher into the air until it became depressurized inside of the cabin, and this would not have caused any alarm to any of the passengers. Basically, everyone would have basically just slipped into unconsciousness and then eventually died due to lack of oxygen. And once, you know, enough time went by, he could then lower the plane back down, which is what was alleged to have happened, and then continue flying at a normal, you know, just at a normal level, like keep flying at the height that he was supposed to be flying. And it was just kind of determined that he let the plane fly until he ran out of jet fuel and then crashed into the ocean. So he didn't have to actually take the action himself. This is what people were saying, you know, that he was maybe either too scared or too cowardly to just go ahead and, you know, crash the plane, like, and get it over with. He just basically allowed, you know, gravity and all of the elements to take over, and once the plane ran out of fuel, then it was over, and he was the last to die. So I don't know. This was obviously one of the bigger ones the Malaysia MH370 flight was, probably the most well-known instance of something like this happening, where a pilot takes down the entire commercial airliner. But there were plenty of other instances, and guys, and I just wanted, before we move on to the next one, I almost forgot to show y'all the Indian Ocean. Oh my god, like my worst nightmare. Y'all, look at this ocean where they were conducting the search for this plane. I mean, this looks like, if you believe in God, this looks like hell on earth. I mean, if y'all have ever seen that movie, what is it called, Interstellar, where they land on the planet with, like, that's covered in water, this is what that reminds me of. I mean, this, I wouldn't even want to be anywhere near this place. So if they did crash here, which is what everyone thinks happened, I mean, obviously, first of all, there wouldn't have been any survivors anyway, but on the off chance that someone did survive a crash like that, imagine landing in this. I mean, absolutely fucking not. Absolutely not. Oh my god, this put me more in trouble. Oh my god. I mean, what? Jesus. Why would you even be on that boat out there? No. Absolutely not. Nope. No. Oh my, no. Abort mission. Abort. What? I mean, what is even your justification for going out here? I don't care what you lost out here. And, like, I mean, this gives me so much anxiety. Just, what do y'all think, guys? I mean, imagine this. Imagine it. Just, like, I can't. The ocean is terrifying. I mean, it is probably the scariest thing one could face. Oh my god. Nope. Can't do it. Wouldn't be me. So let's move on to the next one, y'all. Have y'all heard of Germanwings Flight 9525? Well, this is probably the second most famous crash of its kind, where the pilots deliberately crashed the commercial airliner in order to commit suicide and kill everyone on board. And this was 150 people were on board this particular plane. And this one's pretty scary too, because everyone was actually awake for this. We're gonna hear the black box audio and all of this, but let me tell you a little bit about what happened. So on March 25th, 2015, the co-pilot of a German airliner deliberately flies the plane into the French Alps, killing himself and the other 149 people on board when it crashed. When it crashed, Germanwings Flight 9525 had been traveling from Barcelona, Spain to Dusseldorf, Germany. The plane took off from Barcelona around 10 a.m. local time and reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet at 10:27 a.m. So, shortly afterwards, the captain, 34-year-old Patrick Sondenheimer, requested that the co-pilot, 28-year-old Andreas Lubitz, take over the controls while he left the cockpit, probably to use the bathroom. At 10:31, the plane began a rapid descent and 10 minutes later crashed in the mountainous terrain near the town of Prodst-Haut-Blion in southern France. There were no survivors. Besides the two pilots, the doomed Airbus A320 was carrying 4 cabin crew members and 144 passengers from 18 different countries, including 3 Americans. Following the crash, investigators determined once the captain had stepped out of the cockpit, Lubitz locked the door and wouldn't let him back in. Sondenheimer could be heard on the plane's black box voice recording, frantically yelling at his co-pilot and trying to break down the cockpit door. And this actually caused a complete overhaul of the fortified cockpit door locking system. So when the German Wings flight crashed, the airline wasn't required to have 2 crew members in the cockpit at all times, as U.S. carriers do. So now they require that as well. So this crash actually caused a lot of changes this pilot had had previous psychological issues. He actually had some issues whenever he took his flight tests, and he actually lied on his FAA application, different things of this nature. So I guess one could make an argument for the fact that he should have never been even employed as an airline pilot, but there were some red flags that he tried desperately to hide due to his own ego and his own insecurities, and he didn't want to be looked at as a failure. But nevertheless, he was a failure. He was a douchebag, and you know, that guy's an asshole, and he's burning in hell now for what he did. But this is one of the scarier ones, because there was a quick descent, and then this plane was crashed deliberately into a mountainside. So, I mean, what a way to go. So now let's listen to the black box recording, guys, which is equally as terrifying. That's him banging on the cockpit door. That was the debris left from the plane. I mean, my God. I mean, what a nightmare. What a complete and utter nightmare. If you're sitting in that plane as a passenger and you're hearing the pilot banging on the door of the cockpit in a panicked like voice yelling at the other, I mean, just imagine the scene, guys. I mean, whoo. Oh my God. I mean, it's enough to make somebody never want to fly again. But again, I do just want to stress that, like, everyone, experts, whatever, you know, trust the experts, whatever. Y'all know I question everything. But I'm just saying, in this case, we have to tell ourselves that, you know, and agree with the experts in this case, that flying is very safe. And I think that is true based on the evidence, but no matter how safe it is, I'm sorry, I'd rather get into a car accident, or I don't know, would you rather get into a car accident, a horrific car accident, or a horrific plane crash? I don't know which is worse. I feel like I'd rather a car accident, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. They're both horrible. They're both awful. They're both, you know, just unthinkable. But y'all let me know in the comments down below. So let's look at a few other examples. And these are, you know, less well known. So I'll just probably give you guys a brief overview of these. But I just wanted to share some of the other examples as well. Okay, China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight in China from Kunming to Guangzhou on March 21st, 2022. The Boeing 737 aircraft operating the service descended steeply mid-flight and struck the ground at high speed in Tang County, Wuzhou. Who knows where that is? Killing all 123 passengers and 9 crew members. Multiple reports say that the airplane was deliberately crashed, but the official investigation by the NTSB and the Civil Aviation Administration of China is ongoing. Okay, well, who knows where that'll lead, but it seems that this was deliberate. It is the third deadliest air crash in China after 2 others, and it is the deadliest air accident in China Eastern Airlines history. And look at the trajectory of this, guys. We're going to see actually CCTV footage of this crash that was caught on video, because China has videos cameras and CCTV footage all over their country. So take a look at this right here. Look at that. Oh my God.
The most devastating aviation images in decades. Silently screaming
Jesus.
at nearly the speed of sound, the world still remembers how CCTV cameras captured these terrifying final moments of China Eastern Flight 5735, which crashed in March in southern China. The video capturing the plane plummeting like a spear, almost perpendicularly into a mountainside. And now, nearly 2 months after the crash that killed all 132 people on board in a blazing flash, every air traveler's worst nightmare has become real. Flight data obtained from the black box indicates that someone in the cockpit intentionally crashed this aircraft. In other words, the Boeing 737 was deliberately thrown into that deadly nosedive, very likely by one of the pilots, with the suicidal intention to destroy the plane. China's deadliest aviation disaster in 28 years now becomes a horror story for passengers around the world. While it is theoretically possible that someone may have entered the cockpit and overpowered the pilots into a suicide mission, the bigger likelihood is that one or both of the pilots may have executed this devastating act. The glare is now on captain of the flight, Yang Hongda, the lead pilot on the plane, and his first officer. With investigations now headed down a much more troubling dark path over just why the pilot or pilots could have done such a thing. US officials who analyzed data from the black box flight recorders found amidst the wreckage said that the deliberate input from the cockpit forced the Boeing 737 into its catastrophic dive. Authorities said that the pilots of the plane did not respond to repeated calls from air traffic controllers and nearby aircraft during that devastating descent. Preliminary findings are not just a terrible blow to families of the 132 persons who perished in the crash, but a troubling new nightmare for millions of air passengers boarding flights all around the world. With the world of passenger air travel still grappling with the troubling mystery over Malaysian Airlines MH370's disappearance 8 years ago, the truth of what happened in the cockpit of China Eastern Flight 5735 will keep the world of air travel more sleepless than ever.
So something to just let's just keep our eyes on this, guys. Like, let's just make sure we're all aware of what's going on. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, y'all. So this is Royal Air Maroc Flight 630. Okay, this was a Moroccan pilot who killed 44 people in a suicide crash that was done in 1994. All right, so here's what happened. Basically, so on August 21st, 1994, this Royal Air Maroc Flight 630 crashed approximately 10 minutes after takeoff from Agadir Al-Masari Airport. Okay, which God only knows where that is. I'm not too sure. So, an investigation later showed that the crash was deliberately caused by one of the pilots. So, the pilot who actually was accused was Younes Kiahati. I'm sorry for these pronunciations, guys. Younes Kiahati was the main pilot, or the captain, basically, of this flight. And his co-pilot was alleged to be a possible lover. Okay, so woman pilot. Okay, a red flag. If you get, I'm just saying. I don't know. Diversity is not our greatest strength, as it turns out. But anyways, so the last words heard on the black box were, which I tried to find this footage or this audio, but I could not find it anywhere. But it's alleged that the last words from the co-pilot were screaming, "Help, help, the captain is," and then the rest of the cry was actually lost due to the pilot basically deliberately downturning the airplane into its final streak towards the ground, and systems at that point were being lost, and it was unknown what she was about to say, but one can allege that she was probably trying to say, this motherfucker's trying to kill me. So not good, guys. And he decided to take everyone else along with him, you know, because he had a problem with his girlfriend. So pilot Yunus Kiati was committing suicide by deliberately crashing the plane. His death wish was also to kill the other 43 people on board. So the French news agency reported that the pilot was distraught over a failed love affair. The reasons for this crazy act lie solely in the romantic life of the pilot. The agency quoted unidentified sources close to the Inquiry Commission as saying, and examinations of the plane's sound and data recorder showed that Kiati disconnected the automatic pilot and directed the aircraft towards the ground, said a statement from the commission investigating the crash. The accident is due to the deliberate will of the pilot who wished to end his life, the statement said. And Sophia Vigugui were reported by French officials. The commission found nothing irregular with the plane, which it said had normal periodic maintenance and equipment checks, and it was headed to Casablanca when it crashed 20 miles north of Agadir about 10 minutes after its 7 p.m. takeoff. Kahiati had passed routine medical checkups, the most recent on July 7th, and had passed his most recent pilot examination July 30th. Okay, guys, so what do y'all think about that one? I mean, you know, this is why we need separate spaces. This is why, you know, especially in a close environment like that, and they should have never been allowed to work together if they were lovers and friends and co-workers. I mean, who was in charge here? Who was actually monitoring, you know, what these people were doing? Why would you be on a flight with your so-called lover? I don't know. Maybe they were hiding it from the airline. I don't know. It's just sketchy. It's just very much should have never even been a scenario that could have happened. All right. So that is flight 630 Royal Air Maroc. Now let's go on to the next one. This is going to be Silk Air Flight 185.
The captain, Su Wei-ming, deliberately crashed his plane in a suicide attempt, taking everybody on board with him. What would be the motives behind someone committing such an act? How did he do it? And what evidence is there to support the pilot's suicide conclusion? Captain Su Wei-ming was only one of 2 members of the flight crew on Flight 185. New Zealand-born First Officer Duncan Ward was also in the cockpit of the plane. At first, it was the first officer who was suspect for the crash, as he was the only one in the cockpit once the cockpit voice recording had stopped. However, this does not give you the full picture. The reason why Duncan Ward was the only one in the cockpit at the time was because the captain, Su Wei-ming, took a short break and left the flight deck, and in doing so, the NTSB believed he deliberately tripped the circuit breaker belonging to the plane's voice recorder, as evidenced by the distinctive snapping noise at the very end of the recording. Researching this incident, I found a number of people wondering why it is possible for a pilot to switch off the cockpit voice recorder from the cockpit. What Captain Su Wei-ming tripped was a circuit breaker. It is not a switch like others in the cockpit. One of the points of having these circuit breakers is in the case of the need to troubleshoot, for example determining the source of an electrical fire. If these systems are intercepted, the circuit breaker pops out. Now that the voice recorder had stopped, we don't know for certain what happened in the minutes that followed. However, it is strongly believed that once Captain Su Wei-ming returned to the flight deck, he then waited to get a moment alone in the cockpit without the first officer. This could have been done by either making up some kind of excuse to allow the first officer to leave the cockpit for a moment, or as simple as waiting for him to get up to use the lavatory. Once alone in the cockpit, the captain disconnects the autopilot and swiftly flips the plane over and pushing the 737 in a vertical nose-down position. For just over a minute, the plane picks up enough speed that parts of its structure begin to weaken, with some parts breaking off shortly before it impacted the river below. The plane at some point was also travelling faster than the speed of sound before it crashed into the Mersey River. The recovered record showed clear signs of manual input from one of the pilots. This includes the jack screw assembly which controls the horizontal stabilizer, showing to be in a full nose-down position. The flight path as detailed from ATC was also deemed impossible from a mechanical failure standpoint, and the flight path that the plane took in its final moments would have to have been done manually. The impact itself was with so much force that it embedded plane parts deep below the riverbed. All 104 people on board were killed. But what was the captain's motives? What was going on in his life that drove him to do such a thing? The investigation looked into the history of Captain Su Wei-ming. Su Wei-ming was in the Singaporean Air Force for many years before flying as an airline pilot. In his days in the Air Force, he had had some close encounters with death. During a military exercise exactly 18 years ago to the day of the crash of Flight 185, he lost 4 of his friends, likely taking a toll on his mental health. Alongside being an airline captain, Su Wei-ming was also a stock trader. It was found out that recently before the crash he had lost over $1 million on the stock market due to the financial difficulties a lot of Asia was experiencing at the time. He also had taken out a life insurance policy on himself, which came into effect the very day of the crash.
What?
He then also had some conflict with his airline as well as other members of the Silk Air crew, including his first officer on the day of the crash, Duncan Ward. Su Wei-ming faced some disciplinary action from Silk Air after multiple other pilots questioned his role as a captain and for previously pulling the cockpit voice recorder circuit breaker on another flight. Despite this, the Singaporean police concluded themselves that no member of the crew showed any kind of suicidal tendencies. The Indonesia Transportation Safety Authority, the NTSC, say that there is inconclusive evidence of a suicide scenario. Some of the relatives of the victims of the crash filed a lawsuit against the company Parker Hannifin, who constructed the 737's rudder mechanics, citing that they believe that the crash was caused by mechanical failure. In 2004, a Los Angeles court ruled that the crash was caused by the same faulty system that downed the two planes in the United States a few years prior. However, this court was not allowed to consider the findings and conclusions made by the NTSB.
So that is Silk Air Flight 185. Very terrifying, very horrific scenario. Obviously, each and every one of these is very just as bad as the other. But let me know, what do y'all think about this one, guys? And do y'all think that... Okay, so let's move on to the next one, and this is Egypt Air Flight 990, okay? So this was a regularly scheduled flight from Los Angeles to Cairo with a stopover in New York City. So this happened on October 31st, 1999.
Gamil al-Batouti was a working first officer for the Egyptian national airline Egypt Air. In the early hours of October 31st, 1999, he crashed his plane into the Atlantic Ocean. This was a transatlantic flight with multiple flight crews on board for the journey. So how did he pull this off? And what history does he have with not only his airline, but the people he worked and interacted with as well? Egypt Air are one of the largest airlines on the African continent. They are only one of a few African carriers with direct flights to the United States. In the late 1980s, Egypt Air began making orders for the new Boeing 767, still a highly popular plane today. In fact, the 767 is so popular that it has had a continuous production run for nearly 40 years, and Boeing in 2020 are still taking orders for this plane. At the time, in the past two previous decades, the rules regarding on what planes could fly across the Atlantic was slowly relaxed. It used to be a rule that twin-engine planes could not fly across the Atlantic without staying within a strict limit on how far away from an airport they could be. However, in 1985, the first twin-engine jetliner made its first transatlantic crossing with a more relaxed set of rules. Now, airlines can take a plane like the 767 on longer routes, making for more efficient air travel. Egypt Air operated a route between Cairo and Los Angeles with a 767, having a stopover in New York. On October 30th, 1999, an Egypt Air 767 christened with the name of the ancient pharaoh Tutmosis III made its first leg between Los Angeles and New York successfully. At New York, there was a change of crew for the next leg of the journey, which is an overnight flight directly to Cairo. The plane also picked up new passengers and cargo, with nearly half of all the passengers on board being American, many of them looking forward to visiting Egypt for the first time. 33 members of the Egyptian military were also on board, returning home from a training mission in the United States. After the incident, this detail about the presence of Egyptian military was censored by Egyptian media. There are two sets of crew on this flight tonight, as is standard practice at Egypt Air. One set of crew will fly the takeoff portion of the flight and will fly for around 4 to 5 hours. Then a relief crew will take over, while the main crew rests before taking over again for landing around 1 hour before doing so. Piloting the plane out of New York is Captain Ahmed El Habashi. At 57 years old, he is one of Egypt Air's more experienced captains. His first officer is Adel Anwar, who is 36 years old. This is his last flight before getting married. He even switched duties with another first officer so he could make it home in time for his wedding. The relief crew on Flight 990 consisted of Captain Raouf Nur al-Din, another highly experienced captain at 52 years of age, and the eldest of the whole flight crew this evening was First Officer Gamil al-Batouti at 59 years old. It is also believed that al-Batouti was one of the oldest first officers at Egypt Air. He was often called captain anyway out of respect. And finally, another important member of the flight crew was Egypt Air's Chief Captain Hatem Rushdie. He is also on board, although he won't be flying the plane tonight. In the very early morning going into October 31st at 1:20 AM Eastern Time, this Egypt Air plane flying as Flight 990 leaves New York's JFK Airport, heading east out of the Atlantic. Just 20 minutes after takeoff, and despite not needing to enter the cockpit for a few hours yet, Relief First Officer Gamil al-Batouti enters the cockpit and begins conversation with the current crew on duty. Al-Batouti insists that First Officer Adel Anwar goes and gets some rest and allows him to take over in his position. First Officer Anwar insists himself that he has already had rest before coming into work to fly, but al-Batouti is adamant to relieve Adel Anwar from his duty early. After conversing with the commander of the flight, Captain Ahmed El Habashi, they decide that it is okay for al-Batouti to take over early. For a few moments, al-Batouti then leaves the cockpit, and while they are alone, the first officer speculates to the captain that Gamil does not want to work with Captain Raouf Nur al-Din. Once Gamil al-Batouti returns to the flight deck, First Officer Adel Anwar is relieved of his duty. Al-Batouti takes his seat. Not long later, Captain El Habashi then leaves the cockpit for the lavatory. Once alone in the cockpit, Gamil al-Batouti then disconnects the plane's autopilot. He then pushes forward on the control column. This pushes the plane into a sudden nose-down dive. The sudden force of this action creates a feeling of weightlessness throughout the plane. whatever is not strapped down becomes forced upwards. Passengers' personal belongings, food, liquids, flight attendants, and even some of the passengers themselves who have relaxed by taking their seatbelt off would begin to float or even be pulled to the ceiling of the cabin. Along with pushing the plane into a dive, Albatutti has also shut off the plane's engines. The 767 begins to come dangerously close to the sound barrier with the speed of its descent. Such a plane is not supposed to reach these kinds of speeds, and the structural integrity of the airframe begins to weaken. Captain Ahmed El-Habashi somehow found the strength to pull himself back into the cockpit of the plane. Investigators working on this incident afterwards were left stunned by this revelation. How he pulled himself back into the cockpit is left largely unanswered by investigators. As the captain returns to his seat to try and save his plane, he tries to pull back on his own control column with little response as Gamil Albatutti is already pushing down on his own controls. He then also tries applying the engines to full power. He then realizes that Gamil Albatutti has deliberately shut off the engines. The aircraft began to break apart at around 10,000 feet. Parts of the wings begin to tear away from the plane. The left engine is also ripped from its wing. And at around 1:52 a.m., Egypt Air Flight 990 crashes into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 217 people on board. After the incident, the American-led investigation determined that the crash was officially caused by First Officer Gamil Albatutti's inputs. So why did he do this, if so? As is the case with many instances of pilot suicide, we can never really truly know or understand what was going on inside their head. However, Albatutti's record with the airline and the hotels in which he frequented with being an Egypt Air pilot may help us understand the kind of person he was. He was known on several occasions to exhibit inappropriate sexual behavior, including exposing himself to other guests through the windows and harassing a member of the housekeeping staff. Such conduct landed him in hot water with Egypt Air. Chief Egypt Air Captain Hatem Rushdie had been considering disciplinary action against Gamil Albatutti for some time after the consistent string of inappropriate incidents in New York. The day before the Egypt Air crew left for the airport in New York, Gamil Albatutti was accused again of sexual misconduct. One anecdote from an exiled Egypt Air pilot after the crash reported that Hatem Rushdie had spoken to Albatutti, resulting in disciplinary action once he arrived back in Egypt. The NTSB concluded that the crash of Flight 990 was caused directly by the inputs of the first officer on board. Despite the evidence and the final report by the NTSB, the Egyptian authorities remained displeased with their outcome.
So that is Egypt Air Flight 990, guys, and that is just another example of a crazy person doing something absolutely insane and deciding to take a bunch of people along with them. For what reason, we still don't know. So let's get into our last story, the last example of this, which is Mozambique Airlines Flight 470. And let me tell you a little bit about that one, and then we'll wrap it on up and jump out of here, guys, and leave you even more scared to fly than you were probably before you started this video. Just kidding. Hopefully you're not, because, you know, whatever. Oh, you could be struck by lightning, okay? You could literally be hit by a plane from the sky, like, an asteroid could fall on your head. We don't know how we're going to die, so we cannot let fear cripple us from doing anything that we want to do. But, you know, these stories still do make you a little bit nervous. It does give you a little bit of a pit in the bottom of your stomach. But I think if anybody, you know, is anybody really like totally fine with flying? I don't know. Maybe there's some people out there that are. I always get a little bit nervous just because it's a scary thing, but you shouldn't be fearful. Let's just use these as a cautionary tale and just something to be aware of. So let's get into Mozambique Airlines Flight 470, okay? And let me tell you a little bit about this one. So this was a scheduled international passenger flight from Maputo, Mozambique to Luanda, Angola. On November 29th, 2013, the twin jet operating the service crashed into a national park in Namibia halfway through its flight, killing 27 passengers and 6 crew on board. So this was a smaller plane, obviously, and the preliminary findings of the Mozambican Civil Aviation Institute showed that the captain deliberately crashed the jet. So there are disputes about this, but I think that's just another example of people not wanting to admit, people wanting to cover up, people wanting to divert blame. But it's obvious what happened here, you know, and people ended up agreeing in the end that this was a deliberate act by the pilot, and the captain had actually input controls leading to the crash that was the probable cause of the accident. So while cruising at about 38,000 feet in Botswana airspace, about halfway between Maputo and Luanda, the plane began to rapidly lose altitude. The aircraft descended rapidly at a rate of about 100 feet per second and was being tracked on radar. The aircraft's track was lost from screens at 3,000 feet above sea level after about 6 minutes of losing altitude. Shortly after the aircraft crashed into the national park in a high energy impact, killing all 33 people on board instantly. So the last contact with air traffic control was made at 1:30 over northern Namibia during heavy rainfall. So, okay guys, that was the crash of Mozambique Airlines Flight 470. So yeah, that is Mozambique Airlines Flight 470, and that will be the last deliberate suicide by pilot plane crash that we will be discussing today, guys. So y'all let me know, what do y'all think about all of these different examples? Which one do you think sounded like the worst? I mean, like I said, they're all horrific. I don't want to be in any of these planes whatsoever. I would like to stay as far away from this potential scenario as possible. But it's horrifying. I mean, it really is. I guess, backtracking to my previous statements about having the cabin depressurized and not knowing that you're about to die that's probably the best way to go. I mean, whatever. You might not be able to realize what's about to go down, but at least it's like a peaceful thing, as opposed to having to sit inside of a airplane with absolutely no escape, surrounded by strangers, with the co-pilot being locked out of the cockpit, and you having to hear like loud bangs on the door, people screaming, and chaos happening while the plane goes into like a nosedive descent or crashes into the side of a mountain. I mean, I don't know, but it's really like a case of, would you rather have, a handful of dog shit or a handful of cat shit? I mean, they're both shit. So, y'all let me know, what do y'all think about it, though, guys? And don't be afraid to fly. That's the moral of the story. Despite every horrific thing we talked about today, there's nothing you can do about it. Just trust in God and believe that He is going to carry you through those skies each and every time you fly. And I truly do believe that. And like I said, we cannot live in a bubble. Everybody's got to go at some point, and if you live in fear, then you will die in fear, and that sounds just as bad as anything. So y'all please go ahead and let me know what y'all think about all of this. And did y'all enjoy the topic of today's video? Would you like to see more of this sort of thing? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel, guys. Go follow me on Twitter, of course. That's always a given. And if you guys let me know in the comments if y'all like this video, I will definitely do more. So until next time, I will see you guys later. Okay, bye.
I just tell the truth, and telling the truth is crazy in a world full of lies. If you mix brilliance with bravery, that we can ignite something. Even this conversation alone can ignite the people.
The time is now to express and for people to believe in themselves. The time is now for it to be okay to be great. People in this world shun people for being great, for being a bright color, for standing out. But the time is now to be okay to be the greatest you.